For example, the job seeker rate at the moment is $668.40 a fortnight. So, that's a very small amount. We've certainly been campaigning for it to be raised. It's well below the poverty line. We could take that from $668 and raise it all the way up to $1,925. And the Parliamentary Budget Office is actually calculating in 9 years' time, we'll actually have a smaller budget deficit than we would have if we just brought in the stage 3 tax cuts. That's how massive it is.
One for mum, one for dad, one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains big economic issues in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and welcome back to Follow the Money for 2023. It's set to be a big year for the government and for Follow the Money. One of you out there somewhere listening right now is giving this podcast our 1 millionth listen. It's a huge milestone for this little podcast, and I want to thank you all for supporting the show over the past few years. The Australia Institute is an independent think tank, and this is an independent podcast, but it can only remain so because of our amazing community that supports us to do our work. So if you want to support us and the podcast and help us to continue to do work with impact and influence, please consider giving us a small tax-deductible gift today at australiainstitute.org.au. Over the years, Follow the Money has covered everything from why we need a moratorium on new gas and coal mines, to the Ute-led pandemic recovery, to how Christmas prawns explain Australia's power blackouts. We've had guests from our webinar series, including Nobel Prize winners, former heads of states, as well as community activists, artists and authors. And this year, we've got a big year ahead of us and for you, covering all the big issues like the legislation that's coming up that's supposed to reduce emissions from our biggest polluters and the big flaw that's at its heart. Of course, we'll be explaining what's going on in the economy, how it's impacting ordinary Australians' lives, what the government plans to do about it, and whether or not we think it'll work. And one of the big issues that we're set to debate this year will be the Stage 3 income tax cuts.
Let's kick off with this increasing debate about the Stage 3 tax cuts. The government under pressure to, if not dump them, at least tweak them.
This is the biggest, most expensive tax decision that's ever been made in Australian history.
Apply a 30% flat rate to people earning between $45,000 and $200,000.
Is it justified to give people who are on $200,000 a year a $9,000 windfall?
A $250 billion in income tax cuts, half of which will go to people earning over $180,000 a year.
These tax cuts don't start until 2024.
Now that you're in government, will you reconsider the Stage 3 tax cut?
No changes to Stage 3 tax cuts at this stage. Give you cause for pause about the Stage 3 tax cuts.
Our policy on those tax cuts hasn't changed.
They are obviously walking away from the Stage 3 tax cuts.
Stage 3 income tax cuts implemented by the Morrison government should be abandoned, reversed, abolished, got rid of.
2023 is going to be a challenging year. Dealing with the inflation challenge really for the government it's a key economic priority.
Coming in at a whopping cost of $300 billion, the Stage 3 income tax cuts are truly massive. But is there a better way for Australia to spend $300 billion? How would you spend that much money to make Australia better? Increasing funding for nutritional meals at nursing homes? Would you make childcare free or raise the rate of job seeker above the poverty line? The possibilities are endless. And now there's a new budget tool that can help you make those kind of decisions for yourself and see just how truly massive the Stage 3 income tax cuts are. So to help us put these massive tax cuts into perspective using this brand new budget tool, I'm joined by Dr. Greg Jericho, the Labour Market and Fiscal Policy Director at the Centre for Future Work. G'day, Greg.
G'day, Edney.
Greg, just to start us off with, I've given a very brief overview there, but can you just start by kind of telling us about these Stage 3 income tax cuts that have been legislated? What is this package? Who does it benefit? Why was it brought in?
Why was it brought in is a deeply philosophical, political and ideological question, because they massively benefit the wealthy and the people who probably don't need a tax cut. What they are is, I mean, they're called the Stage 3 because they're the third in a package of tax cuts that the previous government brought in. The stages 1 and 2 were kind of sort of targeted towards lower and middle income earners. The problem was some of them were only temporary, and they were kind of done as a bit of a sop to make everyone feel okay about what was coming down the pipeline. And what was coming down the pipeline was Stage 3 tax cuts, which the big one that they're going is going to happen with them because they are legislated. So if they come into place, is that from 2024-25, everyone earning, or every dollar earned between $45,000 and $200,000 will only be taxed at 30%. And that is a big drop from the current tax rate of 37% for people earning $120,000 to $180,000.
Yep.
And an even bigger drop from 45% for those earning $180,000 to $200,000. So they're a massive, big tax cut for the wealthy. For example, someone on $200,000 is going to get a 5.8% tax cut compared to someone on $50,000 getting around 2.4%.
And is that around, if I recall correctly from everything we did on this last year, it works out about $9,000 a year for those on those really high incomes. Is that about right?
Yep. Just a touch over $9,000 going to people earning, $180,000 to $200,000. So they're getting the massive tax cut, because what this is all about is about trying to what we call flatten the income tax rate, which means basically there's, at the moment, we have a lot of, we have 4 marginal tax rates where the more you earn, the higher your marginal tax rate goes for the money over a certain amount. So when you...
So the idea being the more you earn, the more you can kind of afford to contribute.
Yeah, and what often sort of confuses people is they think, if I earn over a certain amount, that means all of my money is going to be taxed at this higher rate. And it's not. It's just how much you earn over a certain threshold. So once you earn more than $120,000, well, every dollar over that $120,000 gets taxed at a higher rate than the money that you earn below $120,000.
Than the first $120,000.
It's targeted towards, essentially, because people who are wealthy can afford to pay more tax, then they pay a higher tax rate. And that's what we call progressive taxation system. It's been in place ever since income tax really came in. But I guess what we'd say conservative types, right-wing types have long desired to bring in this, what we call this flat tax rate, because it basically benefits the wealthy, and that's where their constituents mainly are. So this Stage 3 tax cut is going to cost $300 billion in its first 9 years, $20 billion in its first year, and around half of that benefit is going to go to people earning over $120,000. It's massively geared towards the wealthy. The richest people who only account for around 3% of taxpayers, they're getting massive amounts of it, and the middle income earners, people who earn $50,000 to $60,000, are getting a very small amount.
The top 1% of taxpayers get almost twice as much money as the entire bottom 60% combined. So this is ultimately a big handout to the rich and to men over women. It's going to grow the gender pay gap, and it's going to grow inequality.
Most economists don't believe that the tax cuts are right for the times.
Tax cuts should be for lower income people.
Many people have just been left behind, people on the lowest income. So tax cuts don't help the bottom 30% of households.
So, Greg, people tend to think of these kinds of things, tax cuts, in terms of how much it will benefit them personally. But what we're interested in today is really the size of the whole package, because, as you've said, $300 billion is just a truly mind-boggling amount of money. And if it's deployed in this way, if we're kind of losing out because it's all going to be spent on income tax cuts, that's every dollar that's going towards these income tax cuts is a dollar that's not available for something else. So now we're all thinking about, these are coming in, you know, the economy's changed quite a bit since these tax cuts were first proposed. But it's hard for people, I think, to imagine what you can do with $300 billion and what some other options might be. And the Parliamentary Budget Office, as you've mentioned in a column for The Guardian, left you a bit of an unwrapped Christmas present, or all of us a bit of a Christmas present under the tree. What have they developed?
Well, you're right. I mean, normally we can get sort of a bit of a guide on how much the statutory tax cuts will cost. So we know, for example, that it costs $300 billion over 3 years, but it's really hard to kind of work out, okay, what does that mean? We can look at budget papers and see, for example, that while in the first year, statutory tax cuts might cost $20 billion, and, you know, the childcare subsidy costs about $13 billion, or JobSeeker costs about $15 billion. But it's really hard to kind of work out, okay, well, what can we increase JobSeeker to make it equal to the same amount as the cost of stage 3 tax cuts? Or what can we do with the tax rate so that we can give tax cuts to people who are on lower and middle income earners and spend just the same amount as money? And what the Parliamentary Budget Office has done is it's really come up with this very cool tool. Well, it's cool for economic nerds like me, in that it enables you to change things from, you know, the rate of inflation or GDP growth or unemployment, but also you can change tax rates, tax thresholds. You can change the amount people are getting for the age pension, for disability support pension, for JobSeeker. And when you change all these figures and all these parameters, it automatically works out what the cost of the budget is, what the impact is on government debt, and it does it for 10 years. So it is a really amazing tool that enables us to actually be a bit more precise in working out how we could spend this money, rather than saying, oh, the stage 3 tax cuts is worth, you know, 3 times as much as how much is spent on X or Y. We're actually able to say, well, instead of this stage 3 tax cut, we could do these precise things and it cost exactly the same amount of money. So it really, I think, changes the debate from being, oh, stage 3 tax cuts are bad, we should get rid of them, to how about we think of in terms of, we got $300 billion to play with here. We can spend that money. The budget isn't going to be worse off. Government debt's not going to be worse off, but we can make things a lot fairer, you know, by just changing a few things around. And I think it really shows the opportunity available to the government, given, you know, you've got $300 billion to spend. That doesn't happen very often.
No, exactly.
The Consumer Price Index jumped 7.8% last year, the highest in nearly 30 years.
There are fresh warnings some services won't be sustainable in the long run unless the nation starts seriously talking about changes to tax.
Government is looking for a really good budget revenue saving measure. If they slash these income tax cuts, then they will save money.
That means doing what we can afford to do amongst all of the good ideas that are pitched up to us.
You know, if there are the storm clouds of a recession coming, people are going to suffer more. So we've got to keep the pressure up, folks, and get Labor to commit to scrapping these tax cuts.
So I know you've had a play around with this and you've run a few different parameters through the Build Your Own Budget tool. So what kind of things could you do and still spend less money than the $300 billion stage 3 income tax cuts?
Well, for example, and this one of the good things about this tool is it just shows you how big the stage 3 tax cuts are. Because, you know, we talk about $300 billion and you kind of don't really grasp just how big that is. But for example, you know, the JobSeeker rate at the moment is $668.40 a fortnight. So, you know, that's a very small amount. We've certainly been campaigning for it to be raised. It's well below the poverty line. We could take that from $668 and raise it all the way up to $1,925. And the Parliamentary Budget Office is actually calculating in 9 years' time, we'll actually have a smaller budget deficit than we would have if we just brought in the stage 3 tax cuts. That's how massive it is. You could actually afford to set the job seeker rate at $50,000 a year. Now, when I sort of suggest this, I had a lot of people saying, "Oh God, you couldn't do that. You know, no one would want to work." And to be honest, I'm not actually suggesting we do raise it that high, although there are sort of debates about such things. But I think it just goes to show how massive this tax cut is. That you could raise job seeker to this much amount, and you're actually spending less. And I think it really sort of brings to light how we think about proper and sensible budget management when we can, we'd suggest maybe raising job seeker to 1,925 and people, oh, that's crazy. But then you're like, well, isn't it just as crazy to give that much amount of money to people earning 200,000, 250,000?
Oh, come on, Greg. I'm sure they're struggling to make ends meet.
The other good thing is, if you decide, oh, look, that probably is a bit unrealistic, and certainly I do think it is unrealistic. I can't see a government doing that. But at the moment, a number of organisations are campaigning to raise the rate to $1,025 a fortnight. That pretty much puts it in line with the poverty line, so people on job seeker would not be in poverty. You could do that. You could still reduce the tax rate for people earning $45,000 to $120,000 from 32.5% to 30%, and still raise the top threshold from $180,000 to $200,000, and you'd still end up spending a few billion less over the nine years than you would with the stage 3. So it's a real indicator there that we can help those who are living in poverty under the job seeker. And we certainly saw during the pandemic that raising job seeker lowered the numbers of people in poverty dramatically. And we can still give a tax cut that is mostly targeted at low to middle incomes.
The people who need it the most.
And we can still kind of say, hey, those rich people, let's give them a tax cut, even if it's just for political purposes. And we're still spending less. I mean, it just was amazing when I was going through all this, trying out these different ways and thinking, okay, this has got to cost more. And it's hell, it costs less, and I'm giving so much to so many people.
Yeah, it's just truly mind-boggling to put it in that kind of context, isn't it? Like you can do this and this and this, and it's still less than...
Yeah, I mean, another classic which really benefits low-income earners, but flows through, this is a proposal that would still give a 2.1% tax cut to people on 200,000, and that is if we were to raise the tax-free threshold from its current rate of $18,200 to $27,850. That would still cost the same amount as the stage 3 tax cut. It would give massive tax cuts to really good, strong tax cuts to lower middle income, but still massive tax cuts to people on really high incomes in the top 10%. Someone on 150,000 would still be getting a 2.8% tax cut. I mean, we're talking such huge numbers here that you can actually, change tax rates and cut them by huge amounts. You could cut the lowest tax rate of 19%, you could cut that to 11.9%, and it would still cost the same amount as the stage 3 tax cut. It's almost like the previous government decided, how can we spend the most money in the worst possible way and do it in a manner that people are going to think is, good budget management. And they can, it's astonishing that it got through, because it is a terrible tax cut. The biggest waste of money I've ever seen in a federal budget. And it's something that unfortunately we'll be stuck with, because we know from history, once you do cut taxes, they don't go up again. That revenue is lost. So my kind of argument is, well, we either decide not to do all of it and we can spend the money elsewhere, or if we are going to give tax cuts, at least let's give them to people who need them and keep the tax system progressive and, helping society become more equal, rather than the stage 3 tax cuts are just going to make things worse, really.
I'm a Conservative. I want to cut your taxes. I wish I could do that tomorrow, quite frankly. But the reason we can't is because of all the reasons right? You're not idiots. You know what's happened, right? We had a massive pandemic for 2 years. We had to shut the country down, do a bunch of extraordinary things. That didn't come cheap. And then we've got this war going on, which is having an enormous impact on inflation and interest rates. The worst thing I could do is promise you a bunch of things that sound great, but ultimately just make the situation worse.
And Greg, this just makes me think about the kind of tax cuts package that was, a little bit similar to this, that came in the UK, that caused Liz Truss to set off a chain of dominoes that crashed the pound and sent everyone's mortgages through the roof and was rejected, kind of by the establishment finance types. And ultimately really resulted in her ended her prime ministership. Where is the Australian debate heading here? Why is this so acceptable? And that seemed, way beyond the pale, even for the Conservative Tories in the United Kingdom.
Well, clearly it's not where it should be. And, it's a reason why you and I and everyone at the Oz Institute is pushing it hard, because one of the real sort of striking things is our tax cuts are actually worse than those that Liz Truss tried to bring in, that over in the UK, all the markets and everyone just went, what the heck are you doing? This is crazy. Here in Australia, for some reason, there has been this belief that, tax cuts will help power the economy. These tax cuts won't do anything except reduce revenue, which means government will have less to spend on services and on payments that are needed, unless it's going to go into more debt, which we know, regardless of whether you're one of these, modern monetary theory people or anything, the reality is governments at the moment are pretty allergic to debt given inflation. So if they have less revenue, they're going to spend less, and it's going to mean budget cuts. And what it's going to mean is we're benefiting the richest through these tax cuts, but we know that government services and government payments go towards low and middle income earners. And so you're basically giving to the richest, and to pay for it, you're taking away from the poorest. It's utter madness. And I wonder if the debate is changing. I think certainly the government, put it this way, I can't believe that the government is sticking to an idea that essentially is Scott Morrison's idea. I mean, what planet are we living where people think that having Scott Morrison's name attached to something makes it a good idea? Surely, almost the government could just stand up and say, yeah, we had a look at this and we remembered, actually, this was Scott Morrison's idea. That's a bad one.
Thought we'd run it over, the ruler over it once more before we proceed.
I mean, you're as you were saying earlier on, the economy has changed quite a deal since this was first introduced. The idea of flattening the tax rate was introduced 4 or 5 years ago before the pandemic. They stuck with it during the pandemic. They changed stage 1 and stage 2 a bit, but they kept doubling down on stage 3. Even before the Labor Party sort of agreed to it, which was at the start of last year's election, that was well before inflation had really taken off. They were listening to the Reserve Bank, who was saying, look, we're not going to start raising rates until wages start growing well above 3%. Well, they reneged on that. I think there's enough economic reasons, certainly, to say we need to do things different with these tax cuts. There certainly is massive amounts of budgetary reasons. This is just terrible if you were running a budget that you would do this. And certainly just in terms of actual sort of societal reasons in what type of society you want, what type of economy you want. This is just a bad way to go about things. Who sits around and thinks we need to benefit the people who don't need help and hurt the people who need help? It's just madness.
You have a tough 4 months ahead preparing this budget. Does the inflation rate mean that you'll be cutting spending and programs that you would have otherwise funded? What does it mean? What's the consequence?
We are going to be fiscally responsible. We will work hand in hand with the Reserve Bank in the work they're doing, not against them, and that requires us to be very cautious with new spending. We need to look at how we reprioritise spending. We did that in October as well. But yes, we can't fund every good idea that is currently before the ERC.
And what I think is great about the Public Parliamentary Budget Office, its tool, is that it means we're not just saying no stage 3 at all, or no, let's just take this 300 billion and put it on the budget bottom line and pay down debt, which, I don't think would be politically tenable at all. But it really just alerts us and gives us some ideas of, okay, well, if we're going to spend 300 billion or around that, let's spend it in a smarter way. Let's spend it in a better way. And this tool gives us that ability to go, okay, well, let's actually put some precise numbers on this thing. It's a really smart tool, something that in the past you kind of would have had to be in Treasury and get some official costings. Now we can all do it. And I think that enables us to put pressure on the government to say, hey, well, why not do this? Isn't this better? Isn't this a more progressive way about running an economy? Isn't this going to help people more? And I think it really is a really strong weapon in our armory now in the fight to get rid of these terrible stage 3 tax cuts.
Well, we might wrap it up there, Greg. I know we'll probably talk to you a fair bit more about the stage 3 tax cuts before all is said and done. We've got a budget coming up and, there's still a whole nother year before these come in. So a long way to go yet. But thanks for alerting us all to, having a bit of fun with this tool and figuring out how we'd all spend $300 billion if we had the chance.
No worries, Ebony. Great to chat.
Thank you. This episode was recorded on Wednesday, the 25th of January 2023, and things may have changed since recording. If you liked today's episode, please rate and review us. It helps other people to find the show. You can visit australiainstitute.org.au for all our latest research and content, and we're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. You can find me on Twitter at Ebony_Bennett with a _N_T. Greg Jericho is at GrogsGammett. Our producer Jennifer Macy is at Jennifer Macy with additional editing by Emily Perkins. The music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. Thanks for listening.